You obey rules you never questioned, work at something you didn't choose, and live in fear of being who you really are. But the most disturbing part isn't that. You defend this system. When someone tries to live differently, you're the first to warn about the dangers. When your kid questions authority, you teach them to obey. When a friend abandons security for authenticity, you call them irresponsible. You've become the guard of your own prison. Every detail was designed to create this result. Because if you knew what Helena Blavatsky documented about your true nature, what hermeticism always taught about your real power, what happens when you stop policing yourself and policing others, this whole theater collapses. Control only works because you forgot something fundamental. You were always free. The prison only exists in your head, and you've had the key since you were born.
You are an infinite consciousness pretending to be an obedient slave. This isn't poetry or cheap provocation. It's the most precise description possible of your current condition. You were born with powers that defy any known limit, but you spend your days worried about bills, other people's opinions, and rules you never questioned. The most disturbing part is that you yourself maintain the bars of your prison. Look around right now. Every person you know lives the same fundamental contradiction. We're beings of infinite possibilities executing limited routines. We repeat thought patterns like programmed machines. We obey power structures that only exist because we believe in them. And we police each other to make sure nobody escapes this invisible matrix. David Icke calls this the greatest conspiracy. It's not a secret group controlling humanity. It's humanity controlling itself. You don't need guards when prisoners watch each other. You don't need chains when fear paralyzes more than any shackle. This system is genius in its simplicity. It convinces you that your limitations are real. But here's the secret that destroys this whole theater. You're already enlightened. You won't be, you can't become, you don't need to achieve it. You already are. Full and infinite consciousness isn't a prize at the end of a spiritual quest. It's your fundamental nature now, at this exact moment, while you read these words. The problem was never the absence of enlightenment. It was excess programming. From the moment you were born, every institution worked to make you forget who you are. School didn't teach you to think, it taught you to repeat. Television didn't inform, it programmed. Family didn't liberate, it conditioned. Every social structure has a single undeclared function, to keep you unconscious of your true nature. Why? Because a being conscious of their infinite power can't be controlled. Helena Blavatsky already exposed this in 1875 when she founded the Theosophical Society. She knew that humans carry an indestructible divine spark, but layers and layers of social conditioning keep it hidden. Not by accident, by design. The system needs you to believe you're small, limited, and dependent. If you knew what you really are, every control structure would collapse in a matter of days. Hermeticism goes even deeper with the principle of mentalism. The all is mind. This means the reality you experience is a mental projection, not just your individual mind, but the one mind of which you're an expression. When you accept imposed limitations, you're literally creating a limited reality. The system knows this. That's why it invests so much in shaping your perception. Think about the last 5 years of your life. How many decisions did you make based on fear? Fear of losing your job, of being judged, of being alone, of not having enough money. Now realize, none of these fears are natural. They were all implanted. A child isn't born with fear of being authentic. She learns, you learned, and that learning became your prison. Conformity is sold as virtue. Be a good citizen, they say. Don't cause trouble, they repeat. Think of others, they insist. But observe, thinking of others always means not disturbing the system. Being a good citizen always means obeying without questioning. Not causing trouble always means accepting injustices quietly. You were trained to be your own jailer. And here we reach the crucial point. If you're already an enlightened consciousness living under collective hypnosis, Liberation isn't about seeking something new. It's about stopping the old from sustaining itself. Every time you obey out of fear, you strengthen the bars. Every time you police someone else's behavior, you tighten the chains. Every time you choose conformity over authenticity, you deepen the sleep. Change won't come from outside. No government will decree your freedom. No institution will return your power. Transformation only happens when you, individually, decide to stop pretending you're less than you are. When you recognize you were always free, you just chose to forget. When you understand that the system only has the power you give it. The forgetting of your divine nature didn't happen by chance. It was architected over millennia. Ancient civilizations knew the truth. The Vedas, written over 5,000 years ago, already stated, Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that. You are the Absolute itself experiencing itself as an individual. Egyptians initiated in the mysteries of Osiris knew that every human carries the seed of divinity. The Gnostics taught that the kingdom of heaven is within you, not in some distant place after death. But how was such a fundamental truth forgotten? The answer lies in the evolution of control systems. In the beginning, dominance was exercised through brute force. Armies conquered territories, enslaved peoples, and imposed obedience by the sword. But this method has obvious limitations. It requires enormous resources, generates constant revolts, and the dominator needs to be always vigilant. The controllers realized there was a more efficient way. Instead of controlling bodies, control minds. Instead of imposing by force, make people desire their own submission. Instead of enslaving externally, create slaves who don't even know they're slaves. This transition took centuries, but it was devastatingly effective. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD is a perfect example. Constantine didn't just legalize Christianity, he reformulated it. Texts that taught inner divinity were declared heretical. The Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus says the kingdom is within you, was banned. In its place, they created a narrative where you're a sinner by nature, need intermediaries to reach God, and your salvation depends on obedience to an institution. You went from divine to sinner with a stroke of the pen, but esoteric traditions preserved the knowledge. Jewish Kabbalah kept alive the concept that humans are direct reflections of the divine through the tree of life. Islamic Sufism continued teaching that you can experience direct union with Allah through internal practices. Hermeticism, resurging in the Renaissance, brought back the principles that reveal your true nature. Blavatsky, in the 19th century, did something revolutionary. She compiled this scattered knowledge into an accessible synthesis. The secret doctrine wasn't secret because it was forbidden, but because it had been deliberately hidden. She exposed that all religions originally taught the same truth. You're an individualized expression of universal consciousness. The differences arose when institutions transformed wisdom into dogma, experience into belief, and direct knowledge into blind obedience. The Hermetic principle of correspondence, as above, so below, reveals the architecture of this manipulation. If you're a reflection of the macrocosm, then by altering your perception of the microcosm, yourself, you alter your experience of the whole. The system understood this. That's why modern education doesn't develop your consciousness, it develops your obedience. That's why medicine treats symptoms, not causes. That's why psychology adapts you to the system rather than liberating you from it. Traditional school fragments knowledge into separate disciplines, preventing you from seeing the whole. History is presented as a sequence of wars and dates, not as an evolution of consciousness. Science is taught as absolute truth, not as an interpretive model. Religion is sold as external salvation, not as internal experience. Each fragment keeps you busy without ever revealing the complete picture. The 20th century accelerated this process. Edward Bernays, Freud's nephew, created the engineering of consent. He understood that by manipulating unconscious desires, you can control conscious behavior. Advertising doesn't sell products, it sells identities. Politics doesn't debate ideas, it manipulates emotions. The media doesn't inform, it programs. You believe your opinions are yours, but how many of them did you really originate? Social self-policing completes the system perfectly. You don't just obey, you ensure others obey too. When someone acts differently, you feel discomfort. When someone questions too much, you call them a conspiracist. When someone lives outside the patterns, you judge them irresponsible. You've become an agent of the system without getting paid for it. The hermetic law of vibration explains why this works. Everything vibrates at specific frequencies. Fear vibrates low. Conformity vibrates low. When you maintain these frequencies, you tune into the control matrix. But self-love, authenticity, courage, these vibrate high. When you cultivate them, you literally leave the frequency of control. Awakening isn't adding something new, it's removing layers of conditioning. Every limiting belief you question, every fear you face, every pattern you break, you're not becoming enlightened, you're just stopping pretending you're not. The most effective control is the one you execute yourself without realizing it. Right now, while watching this video, your unconscious has already made dozens of decisions. It decides if you believe or resist what's written. It decides if you keep reading or look for something else. It even decides the level of openness you'll have to these ideas. And you believe you consciously decided. Researchers like Benjamin Libet demonstrated something disturbing. Brain activity indicating a decision happens up to 10 seconds before you consciously decide. What you call free will is just the narrative your brain creates after the decision's already been made. David Icke goes further. 100% of your choices originate in the unconscious. The conscious is just the unconscious's PR department, creating stories to justify what's already been decided. Now understand the system's genius in its most sinister form. It doesn't need to control your conscious. It programs your unconscious. And you defend that programming thinking they're your own ideas. How does this happen? Through fear installed in layers so deep you don't even recognize it as fear. You call it prudence, responsibility, common sense. But observe, every time you avoid authenticity, it's fear. Every time you choose security over truth, it's fear. Every time you silence your inner voice, it's fear. Fear doesn't need to be paralyzing terror. In fact, the most effective fears are subtle. Fear of disappointing your parents. You call it respect. Fear of losing status. You call it ambition. Fear of being alone. You call it love. Fear of being judged. You call it politeness. Each of these disguised fears shapes your decisions before they even reach consciousness. But you don't just obey this programming, you impose it on others. When your kid questions an absurd rule, you scold them. When your friend tries something different, you warn them about the dangers. When someone lives outside the standards, you feel the need to correct them. You've become a prison guard without realizing you're also a prisoner. The hermetic principle of rhythm reveals how this perpetuates. Every action generates reaction. Every movement generates counter-movement. When you try to control another, you create resistance that generates more control. It's a vicious cycle where victim and executioner constantly trade roles, but the prison remains intact. Blavatsky described this through the concept of Maya, the great illusion. But Maya isn't just an external illusion. It's mainly the illusion that you need the system, that without it, there'd be chaos. Those rules exist for your own good. That external authority is necessary. These are the biggest lies, and they're maintained not by governments or corporations, but by you, yourself. Self-policing works in multiple layers. First layer, you monitor your own thoughts, censoring the inappropriate ones. Second, you monitor your behavior, adjusting to what's expected. Third, you monitor others, ensuring collective conformity. Fourth, you monitor the monitors, watching if others are watching properly. It's fractal surveillance. Each level replicates the control pattern. And why do you do this? Because deep down, way deep down, you know you're powerful, and power without direction seems dangerous, so you prefer known chains to unknown freedom, prefer the cage's security to flight's uncertainty, prefer being the system's victim to being responsible for your own life. The dynamic is this: a tiny minority, maybe 1% of the population, understands these mechanisms. They don't need to control billions directly. They just need to maintain the programming that makes the billions control each other. It's like a mental virus that uses the infected themselves to spread. The educational system is the first line of this virus installation. Naturally, questioning children are molded into obedient adults. Don't interrupt, wait your turn, do like everyone else, don't be different. Each of these apparently harmless orders is installing the self-policing software. When the child reaches adulthood, the program is so integrated, it seems like their personality. The media keeps the program updated, not through explicit propaganda, but something more subtle, defining the limits of acceptable thought. You can disagree within certain parameters. You can question as long as you don't question too much. You can be different as long as your difference fits in pre-approved categories. It's freedom of choice between options that others have defined. To break this cycle, you first need to recognize it. Every time you feel the impulse to correct someone, ask, does this come from love or fear? Every time you censor your own thoughts, question, who installed this censor? Every time you obey automatically, stop, who does this obedience serve? Regular people are breaking the matrix every day. You just don't notice because the system calls them crazy. Edward Snowden sacrificed his comfortable life to expose global surveillance. Julian Assange revealed war crimes that governments wanted hidden. But observe the reaction. Instead of focusing on the exposed crimes, the system made you focus on the exposers. They're traitors, they say. They put lives at risk, they repeat. And you, programmed for self-policing, agree without realizing you're defending your own executioners. These are extreme examples, but awakening happens on smaller scales daily. The mother who takes her kid out of school to educate them at home. The executive who abandons their career to live simply. The young person who refuses to attend university to learn directly. Each of these acts is a refusal to participate in the matrix. And each generates the same reaction. The collective tries to pull them back. Hermeticism teaches through the principle of polarity that every phenomenon has two poles. Fear has courage as its opposite pole. Conformity has authenticity as its opposite. When you change your position on this spectrum, your entire reality reorganizes. It's not a theory, it's the physics of consciousness. David Icke is a living example of this. In the 90s, he was a respected BBC presenter. Then, he started talking about the illusory nature of reality, about infinite consciousness, about control systems. He was ridiculed worldwide, but he didn't back down. He kept researching, exposing, and revealing. Today, millions recognize he was decades ahead. What did Icke do? He recognized his infinite nature and refused the external imposition of limits. He also refused internal imposition. He didn't let fear of judgment silence him. He didn't allow the need for approval to control him. He demonstrated in practice what happens when you stop feeding the system with your energy. Blavatsky did something similar a century earlier. At a time when women could barely vote, she traveled the world, studied with Tibetan masters, founded a global movement, and wrote treatises that shook Western thought. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for approval. She simply acted according to her enlightened nature, and the world had to adjust. The Hermetic principle of cause and effect reveals why these examples matter. Every act of individual liberation creates ripples in the collective field. When you break your programming, you weaken the programming around you. When you refuse fear, you inspire courage in others. When you live authentically, you give tacit permission for others to do the same. But the system has defenses. When someone starts awakening, they're immediately categorized. Conspiracy theory, they say, even when presenting documented facts. Denier, they label, even when questioning with evidence. Extremist, they classify, even when preaching nonviolence. These labels are the system's antibodies, trying to isolate and neutralize the threat to the status quo. The strongest evidence of awakening is the system's disproportionate reaction. If your ideas were irrelevant, they'd be ignored. But they're attacked, ridiculed, censored. Why? Because the system knows something you forgot. A single awakened person can awaken thousands. A single act of courage can inspire a revolution. A single refusal to obey can topple empires. Everything's connected like facets of the same diamond. Your enlightened nature is what the system fears. Control by fear only works while you forget who you are. Pressure for conformity exists to prevent you from expressing your divine uniqueness. Non-imposition dissolves control. Focusing on the essential undoes the distractions that keep you trapped. Inner change is the only revolution the system can't contain. See the pattern. Every person who awakened followed the same path. First, they recognized something was wrong with consensual reality. Second, they questioned the beliefs that maintain that reality. Third, they faced the fear of being different. Fourth, they acted according to their inner truth, not external expectations. Fifth, they endured the collective's attack. Sixth, they persisted until their new frequency stabilized. You can cite exceptions, people who tried and failed. But observe, they failed when they gave in to fear, when they sought approval, when they tried to awaken while keeping one foot in the matrix. Awakening isn't negotiable. Either you completely recognize your infinite nature, or you keep pretending to be limited. Tesla's case illustrates this perfectly. He saw beyond material reality and understood energy in ways that defied conventional science. His inventions could have freed humanity from energy scarcity, but the system couldn't allow that. Free energy means free people. So Tesla was marginalized, his patents confiscated, his work hidden. Even so, his ideas survived and today inspire a new generation of inventors working outside the system. The evidence is everywhere. Awakening is unstoppable. More and more people question official narratives. More and more reject programmed lives. More and more choose authenticity over security. The system reacts with growing censorship, expanded surveillance, and intensified control. But this only proves desperation. You don't need to censor lies. You censor truths dangerous to power. Keep sleeping and see where that gets you. Another 40 years of work you hate. More decades of obeying rules that don't make sense. Another whole lifetime pretending to be who you're not. The consequences of remaining unconscious aren't abstract. They're viscerally real. Epidemic depression isn't an accident. It's the direct result of living against your nature. Generalized anxiety isn't a chemical defect. It's your consciousness screaming that something's deeply wrong. Existential emptiness isn't a lack of purpose. It's an excess of false purposes the system sold you. The global explosion of mental disorders isn't a coincidence. Anxiety and depression have become the most diagnosed conditions in the modern world. Why? Because living a fake life is literally unbearable. Your infinite essence can't be compressed indefinitely into a limited existence. Something has to give. Either you wake up or you get sick. There's no third option. but the cost goes beyond the individual. Every person who remains asleep sustains the system that imprisons everyone. You're not just a victim, you're an accomplice. Every time you obey out of fear, you legitimize illegitimate authority. Every time you conform, you validate conformity as the norm. Every time you police another, you strengthen the bars of the collective prison. Now reverse the equation. What happens when you wake up? First, fear loses power over you. Not because you become brave, but because you recognize most fears are illusions. Fear of losing your job? There are infinite ways to sustain yourself. Fear of judgment? Other people's opinions are their problem, not yours. Fear of death? You're an infinite consciousness temporarily focused in a body. Second, you stop needing external approval. When you know who you are, others' validation becomes irrelevant. This isn't arrogance, it's autonomy. You act according to your inner truth, not others' expectations. Your decisions emerge from your center, not the social periphery. Third, and this is fundamental, you become a breaking point in the system. Your simple, authentic existence questions the entire control structure. You don't need to preach or convert anyone. Your living example is more powerful than 1,000 arguments. People around you start questioning, if they can live like that, why can't I? The Hermetic principle of gender teaches that all creation requires masculine and feminine polarities, action and reception, projection and embrace. Awakening too. It's not enough to reject the system, masculine, you need to embrace your true nature, feminine. It's not enough to break conditioning, masculine, you need to nurture new consciousness, feminine. Controversy arises between personal responsibility and systemic change. Activists say focusing on individual transformation is escapism, that we need to change structures. Spiritualists say fighting the system perpetuates duality, that only inner change matters. Both are partially right and fundamentally wrong. The truth is that internal and external are inseparable. As Blavatsky taught, the microcosm and macrocosm are mutual reflections. When you change inside, the world changes as a consequence. But this doesn't mean passive meditation while the world burns. It means acting in the world from your awakened center, not from your conditioned programming. Look at the awakened who became gurus selling prosperity courses. They traded one matrix for another. They're still in the same game of accumulation and status, just with spiritual varnish. That's not awakening, it's redecorating the prison. True awakening questions the entire game, not just moves the pieces around. The practical implication is radical. You need to rebuild your life from scratch. You can't wake up and continue in the same job that betrays your inner truth. You can't recognize your infinitude and maintain relationships based on fear and dependency. You can't see through the matrix and keep consuming its programming. This scares because it seems to demand the sacrifice of everything you know. But observe the linguistic trick. Sacrifice implies loss of something valuable. What value does a fake life have? What value does security built on fear have? What value does comfort bought with your authenticity have? You're not sacrificing anything real. You're abandoning illusions that never served you. The system reacts violently to this abandonment. Family questions your sanity. Friends distance themselves. Society tries to pull you back through guilt, shame, and fear. Think of your children, they say, as if living a lie is a good example. Be realistic, they insist, as if their reality is the only one possible. You have responsibilities, they pressure, omitting that these responsibilities were imposed, not chosen. But something extraordinary happens when you persist. The universe conspires in your favor, not in some vague, mystical sense, but in precise quantum mechanics. When you vibrate at your authentic frequency, you attract corresponding resonances. Opportunities arise. Aligned people appear. Resources flow. It's not magic, it's the physics of consciousness. The choice is binary. Wake up or rot. There's no comfortable middle ground. Every day asleep is a day wasted. Every decision based on fear deepens the sleep. Every conformity strengthens the chains. Time isn't on your side. It's on the side of the system that feeds on your unconsciousness. But right now, you're finally returning to the beginning, to what you always were before you forgot. The truth is, you're an infinite consciousness that was convinced to pretend to be limited, not through force, but through subtle programming that started at birth and never stopped. The system doesn't need armies when it has schools, doesn't need prisons when it has fear, it doesn't need guards when you watch yourself and others. Your enlightened nature isn't a future achievement, it's a present reality covered by layers of conditioning. The fear that controls you isn't yours. It was implanted, and you maintain it, thinking it protects you. The conformity you practice isn't a virtue, it's surrender disguised as responsibility. The imposition you suffer and apply isn't necessary, it's the engine that keeps the matrix running. What really matters has become clear. It's not your daily worries, your petty fights, your manufactured fears. It's the recognition of who you are and the courage to live according to that truth. Everything else is a distraction, entertainment to keep you busy while you waste the opportunity to be truly free. Change begins inside because it can't begin anywhere else. The external is a projection of the internal. The world is a mirror of collective consciousness. While billions remain asleep, dreaming the same programmed nightmare, reality will keep reflecting limitation, scarcity, and conflict. But when you wake up, you create a rupture in the field. Others feel it, even without understanding. Your frequency affects the whole. This isn't abstract philosophy. It's the functional mechanics of reality. Hermeticism always knew. Theosophy always taught. Initiatic traditions are always practiced. Only you were kept in ignorance, because your ignorance is the system's fuel. But knowledge without practice is sterile knowledge. You can read 1,000 books about swimming and still drown in the first pool. Awakening demands action, demands you stop consuming information and start living a transformation, demands you leave the comfort of the known and enter the discomfort of the true. The most direct path to this transformation has always been the same. Through all ages, all cultures, all true traditions, one practice remained central, quieting the mind to hear consciousness. Yogis call it dhyana, Buddhists call it zazen, mystic Christians call it contemplation. The names change, the essence remains. When you quiet the programmed mental noise, something deeper emerges. It's not new information coming in, it's your true nature emerging. Silence dissolves programming. Stillness reveals what was always there. Meditation isn't a relaxation technique, it's deprogramming technology. Every minute in conscious silence weakens the system's control over your mind. Every moment of pure presence dissolves layers of conditioning. Every instant of consciousness without thought reconnects you with what you are beyond the matrix. That's why meditation is simultaneously the simplest and most revolutionary practice possible. You don't need a guru, don't need initiation, don't need secret knowledge. You just need to stop, sit, be silent, and observe. What emerges from that silence is more powerful than any external revolution. It's the experiential recognition that you were always free, always infinite, always complete. All change begins with understanding your role as co-creator, and the only way to connect with that divine intelligence is through meditation. We've developed a set of audio tools to help you access this higher state of consciousness. To learn more and get immediate access, click the link on screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments, "It made sense to me,"